This video we're going to be looking at inputs and also let's have a look at the input keyword. Now, input keyword, this code pattern, as you can see on the screen, has more than just simply the input. Okay, so it's actually got an assignment and a variable name. So I'm going to explain that in a second. But we start off with just the keyword input, followed by a question that we want to display. So when this line of code runs, it will print out whatever that string literal is, and then it will wait until the user enters something. So they have to type some text in and then press the enter key. Once they press the enter key, whatever they've typed in on the computer will be stored inside this variable. Okay, so it gets assigned to whatever variable's on the left-hand side. Okay, so two things to pull out of this straight away. First of all, in order to use input, we should always have a variable as well. So we should always be in this kind of format. The name of that variable is up to you. It could be absolutely anything as long as it follows the rules of variable naming. And the second thing is it always returns a string. Okay, so whatever I've typed in the keyboard, even if I've typed numbers in, it will always be treated as a string, and we'll look at how we can get around that in a moment. Make sure in your notes you have this in this format, because if you don't have it in this format, one thing I've seen students in the past do is they'll put input and they don't put that in. So input is used to get simple text information from the command prompts. It's always a string. So key rule, should always store the result of an input into a variable, otherwise whatever the user entered will be lost. You can't do anything with it. So let's actually think a little bit about data types now. Now, here's a little question. Does 12 equal 12? Okay. When we have two equals in Python, that means is it the same as equals? So it's kind of like what we'd think of equals to be in real life. So what do you think? Is 12 equal to 12? The answer is no. Okay. I know it sounds a bit weird, but notice that there's quotation marks. This is a string, literal, i.e. it's a string. This is an integer. You can't compare strings and integers together. It will basically say false or no every single time because they're the wrong data types. There are a number of different data types in Python, and we're going to be spending time looking at them over the course of these videos. The ones that we're going to be coming across fairly quickly are floating point numbers, or floats, which are going to be decimal numbers, integers, or ints, which are whole numbers, and strings, or str, which is always going to be text. So in an expression, we're not allowed to mix and match these. So I can't, for example, try and add a string to an integer, because essentially the computer will say, oh, I don't really know how to do that, sorry. We need to make sure data types match in expressions. Okay. Look at this example. Here I've got three variables, x, y, z. X has a number 12 in it, y has the floating point number 12.6, and z has the string 12. If I try and add them together, I'm going to get an error message, and this is an example of what the error message would look like. We'll say unsupported operand for types for float and string. Okay, so what it's really saying is, well, I can handle just about adding a float and a string and integer together. Okay, I can handle that. I can roughly work it out. But you're asking me to add a float to a string, I don't know how to do that. Okay, so that's what this is saying. Type error means that the types you're trying to do in an expression don't match up. So it's worth actually looking at these errors, because by now you've probably come across them already. They're not the easiest things to read. Okay, so let's actually just try and read an error message properly. Okay, so traceback basically is all the functions that we called so far. Because we haven't really been using functions, it's just going to tell you exactly where the problem is, or roughly where the problem is. It's not always exact. So it's going to try and tell you the line number, so it gives you an idea where the error might be. Now, one warning. That may not be the exact line number the error is. Sometimes it might be on the line before, or it might be before you got to that point. So you do need to look around that line, not only at that line. It then tells you the type error. So operand is an operation. Okay, so to add, subtract, to put times and things like that. Types are the data types, and then it will tell you the data types it's trying to, or it can't add, subtract, whatever happens to be. Okay, so it will tell you the line it thinks it's on. Traceback is roughly where the error happens, and the bit here is going to tell you the type of error and what it thinks the problem was. So if a variable is a string, but we could turn it into an integer. So for example here, that's got a string of 12 in it. So it makes sense. I could turn that integer, it would turn into an integer. I can't, for example, turn the letter A into an integer, because that makes no sense, but I could turn 1, 2 into 12. So when I want to convert between two data types, we call it casting. Okay, so casting and input really do go hand in hand, because there's a number of times I might want a number to be entered by the user. So I would have to cast it from a string into an integer, or a string into a floating point number, in order to actually do any calculations with it. So if I wanted to cast something, I would use these commands. So if I wanted to cast this string into a floating point number, I put the command float followed by the variable I want to cast. If I wanted to cast it into an integer, I put int followed by z. If I wanted to cast something into a string, same idea, I put str followed by whatever I want to turn into a string. So cast will basically turn one data type into another if it can. If it can't, it will give you an error message. Let's have a look at how we could do this with inputs. Okay, so let's say I want to have two numbers entered by the user and I want to add them up. Okay, so in this first example, you can see I use an input as I did before, and I've got two different variable names. Another key point when using input, should always try and use different input names if it's a different item, because otherwise things get a bit complicated. I then cast each of those into integers, and notice I then assign it back to number. I can then add them up as before. So that's one way you can do it. Another way is I can do it when I'm printing. Okay, so you can see here, rather than assigning it to a number, I've just simply got it to do it as I'm printing. So I've got int num1 plus int num2. So I'm doing it as a thing. I've noticed a little error. I forgot an X bracket there. I apologise. Okay, or I could do it when I'm entering the number. So I've got my inputs, and then I've got my int around it. Now, just a little thing about these. When we are dealing with expressions, it always does the things inside the brackets first. So in this case, it's going to do this first. So it's going to convert that number one into an integer, and that's going to be placed here. It's then going to do this one second. Then it's going to do the addition third, and then finally it's going to do the print fourth. In this example, it's going to do the input first, and then it's going to converting it into an integer. Oops. And then finally, it'll assign it into that variable. Okay, so the order of expressions is normally does the things inside brackets, and then it kind of works its way out first. So going back onto IHS codes, you should be able to now start to access all the tasks that are under the input-output section. Do have a go through them. Again, start at bronze. If they're too easy, move on to silver and work your way up. Try and get yourself into gold and do all of them, because variables, input and printing are fundamental building blocks. If you don't get these three concepts, you'll start to struggle with the next section, which is selection, if statements, and certainly iteration will become very complicated. So make sure you master this first before moving on.